So we arrived in Anglesey yesterday and arrived about 3:30 to our campsite, and I'll show you more about that later. Today, which is the Friday, we had lunch at the campsite, and then we've come over to Penrose Country Park because Michael's gone off fishing. He's on the breakwater that divides Anglesey from Holyhead Island, and I'm actually at the country part itself, and I'm about to start a painting, but this time I'm not facing the seaside. I've done that picture many times, so I've always wanted to have a go at painting the lake on the other side. Can't see much of the lake, but there are some interesting rushes and trees and a few flowers, so I'm going to have a go at that. Well, today, Saturday, after a lazy morning at the campsite, packed up a packed lunch but decided to have it at the campsite before we set off to a beach that we found last September round the corner from Ross, Niger. And it's where Andrea and I had a paddle last September, so I was determined to go in the sea again there and try out my new changing robe and my beach bag, etc. So we set off and arrived, lovely and hot. I think it was one of the hottest days. Sat on the beach for a little while, and then I went for a paddle. Found out the water wasn't too bad really, and because the waves were coming in, it was soon before I got thoroughly wet, so I might as well have had a swim. So I had a very small swim in the sea, which was absolutely delightful. But the waves were coming in as it was about an hour or so just before high tide. So came back, got changed in my new homemade changing robe, and then we drove to Holyhead, to the harbour where all the boats are moored up against the harbour wall, and Michael's gone off for a fish somewhere, so I've just sat in the car making a recording of this. Have you caught anything? Today we had a morning at the campsite, had our lunch there, and then we set off into Holyhead. First of all, to go to the charity shop again, because Michael wanted some more of the socks that I'd bought him the previous day, and I found a lovely patchwork quilt, which I'm hoping to maybe cut up into a jacket, or even just leave it as it is. We then drove to Penrose, the park on the coast, where I sat and painted a view looking across the water this time, and Michael went to have a look to see what the fishermen were catching. I think they just caught a bass, so he wasn't very impressed. We got back to the campsite at about 7:30, and we'd managed to go into Asda beforehand, mainly to get a cooked chicken, but there weren't any as it was quite late. But we got a lovely sausage wrapped in bacon, pigs in blanket, in a muffin. So we're quite happy that Michael was able to eat the whole lot. I ate the pigs in blanket, and we fed the bread to the seagulls and got some interesting footage of them squabbling over the crumbs. So then it was back to the campsite for a lazy evening. I'm sat here on a bench overlooking the Menai Straits. I've just completed a watercolour painting showing the mountains. Somewhere over there is Snowdonia, and the water, which is just about on high tide. Earlier we went to SeaWorld to see if it had changed, because the last time that we went there was 25 years ago. I don't think much has changed at all. In fact, they told me that some of the fish were at least 25 years old, and it didn't look as if it had had a coat of paint either for the last 25 years. But it was still all very interesting to see all the different fish that we know are somewhere in these waters round Anglesey. Today we've done quite a lot. packed up a lunch and then set off. Managed to find some parking at Triada Bay for an hour, so I was able to sit and sketch there. We then carried on to some of our little favourite bays that are on the way to South Stack Lighthouse, where we were able to have a walk and look at the flowers mainly. Very quiet sea today, not much wind. We went to South Stack Lighthouse and walked right down to the RSPB hide, where we could see the guillemots, the kittiwakes nesting. Saw some puffins bobbing around on the water, but they were so far away it wasn't very clear, and found out that they're nesting on the rocks out of sight from where we were, and you'd have to go all the way down the steps to South Stack Lighthouse to view them, so decided to leave that for another day. After we'd finished at South Stack Lighthouse, we drove into Holyhead, found that our favourite fish and chip shop was open, so bought fish and chips, or fish for me, and we ate them on the marina in Holyhead and had a FaceTime chat with William. We then went to Lidl's to stock up on some grocery supplies, and we then drove to the Penrose Country Park, Coastal Park I think it is, where we're sitting now. Michael's gone for a walk along the Breakwater Road while I've been sitting sketching with some coloured pastels that I'd bought in Lidl. Quite hard to do anything in detail, but quite fun to use because there's 36 different colours which you can blend in and mix and match. So I'm going to have another go in a minute. Today was Kemlyn Day, and it was a beautiful sunny day, so we chose well. Packed up our lunch. The day before we'd bought a roasted chicken, so we took part of that with us and other nibbles, and drove all the way to Kemlyn, parked up on the bay side of the Kemlyn and at the car park. About 11:30 we got there, so it was time for me to do a painting of the bay. This time I used my gouache paints, and there was plenty of the sea cabbage in flower along the edges of the shore, so it looked all very picturesque. After I'd finished the painting, we had some lunch and then decided to leave the car where it was, because we found out that Springwatch had this Kemlyn Bay had been on Springwatch the night before, so there were quite a lot of people there. We weren't sure about the car park on the other side of the bay, so we decided to walk over there so we could go and have a look at our favourite spot, the rocks. Quite a trudge, it must be about a mile across the shingle and the pebbles, but we then were able to see all the terns flying out across the sea to catch the fish, small sprite, small bait to bring back to their nesting young that were on the island. There were literally hundreds of them, and they were in groups of 5 or 6 at a time flying out low across the bay, so that was quite interesting to watch. We then got over to the other side and walked over to where the rocks are. Again, sat down, did a small sketch. Because of the carrying everything, I only took my small sketchbook with me and did a pencil drawing, and just enjoyed the views, and then had to walk all the way back along the shingle, so I was pretty tired by the time we got back. It was hard on the legs. Then we drove all the way back home and had the rest of the chicken in various concoctions. I think I had mine with tomato, Michael had his curried up, and for our supper, and we're now just expecting to have a nice sunset. It's about 10 o'clock at night. The sun is just about to set, and might not be a dramatic sunset, as we've had a few really dark red skies, but it's hoping that we should have another good day tomorrow. Today we were planning to go back to the beach where I'd had my first swim, but we saw the owner of the campsite in the morning, and he told us about Cable Bay, which is a little bit further on, which he said was a warmer bay. Well, the sea isn't warmer because it's an enclosed bay with lots of sand, and he was absolutely right. Anyhow, we first of all had our lunch. I packed up sandwiches, and we were going to have them on the trip, but in the end we had our sandwiches at the campsite, and then we headed off to find Cable Bay. It was a lovely little sheltered bay, nice and warm. We got there at about 2:45, so I immediately went in for a paddle, and then the water was quite warm, in fact as warm as a swimming pool really. So I did end up going for a swim, and had about a 20-minute swim in the shallows, because the tide was coming in. If you swam into certain areas, there was a sort of cold draft of water, I think, that had been coming from further out in the deeper parts of the ocean, said to chill it to you, but most of it was deliciously warm. So then, having dried off and warmed up, I did a little bit of sketching. We had a cup of tea on the beach and left at about 5:15. And we've just had our tea, beef burgers and other things. Watched a beautiful sunset. We were able to drive down to the beach, park up, and we camped up on the beach for a couple of hours. I went for a swim. It was much colder than it was when I went in Cable Bay the day before, but when you get in, you get used to it. So it wasn't too bad. So I had a nice swim for about 20 minutes, came back, dried off, and came back to the campsite. Lovely evening again. But this morning we woke up to rain, a lot of it. It's just stopped raining now, and so we're going to hastily pack all the beds and all the things that might get really wet into the car, and we're coming back a day early because it's going to rain tomorrow, so there's not much point in actually staying. We need a bit of a lull to get things into the car, so without ado, that's what I'm going to do now.